Not every goodbye arrives all at once. Sometimes it settles slowly into the hearts of those who grew up watching, listening, and remembering. Welcome to Hollywood Tributes, where we pay tribute to beloved American actors, entertainers, and cultural icons whose impact still remains. If these memories matter to you, your support helps preserve them for future generations. The news about Grizz Chapman's passing landed in a way that feels strangely heavy. Grizz Chapman, gone at 52. For many people, he was the towering presence from 30 Rock, the man audiences knew as Grizz Griswold, standing beside chaos while somehow making calm look effortless. A familiar face. Sometimes that matters more than people admit. His passing was confirmed, leaving fans from a different television era sitting with memories they probably didn't expect to revisit today. Because 30 Rock belonged to a period when network television still gathered millions into the same conversation. Mid-2000s, Thursday nights, before streaming turned everything into separate worlds. You watched, you laughed, and certain faces stayed with you for years without needing headlines. Grizz had that rare quality. He looked intimidating at first, nearly 6 feet 10 inches tall, but often carried warmth underneath the joke. The kind of person who could become part of a show's identity simply by being there. Presence, timing, a quiet confidence. Born in Brooklyn in 1974. New York through and through. And if you grew up watching sitcoms evolve from the Cheers era into the Office generation, you probably understand how supporting characters sometimes become permanent fixtures in memory. I'll admit something, 52 feels too young. It does. Not every loss belongs to a superstar with decades of awards. Sometimes it's someone whose face reminds you where you were in life when you laughed harder, stayed up later, or still believed television could feel familiar. Years pass. Shows end. Then suddenly, the people connected to those memories begin disappearing too. And that realization stays with you longer than expected. The passing of Richard Chamberlain at 90 feels like the closing of a very old chapter. Not just in Hollywood, in American living rooms. Richard Chamberlain, the actor who became a phenomenon through Dr. Kildare, was more than a television star. In the early 1960s, he was the face many young women taped inside lockers or kept beside record collections. An actual teen idol, back when television arrived once a week and families adjusted schedules around it. His death was confirmed, leaving behind generations who watched him move from Dr. Kildare to Shogun, then later to the Thorn Birds, where his performance turned into one of those cultural moments people still mention decades later. And that matters, because viewers who lived through the 60s, 70s, and 80s remember when actors carried mystery. You didn't know everything about them. No endless social media updates. Their lives stayed partly hidden, which somehow made admiration feel deeper. Born in Los Angeles in 1934, Chamberlain spent years reinventing himself. That always impressed me. Teen idols usually fade. He didn't. He found serious roles, survived changing tastes, and remained recognizable long after many contemporaries disappeared from public memory. I think people underestimate what longevity costs. To live to 90 means watching entire generations arrive and leave. His final years in Hawaii seemed quieter, far from the noise that once surrounded him. Then time does what time always does. You realize the actors who stood at the center of your youth are becoming memories themselves. Not erased. Never erased. Just moved into that place where old songs, black and white television, and certain faces continue existing long after the curtain falls. The passing of David Burke at 91 feels different from many losses in television. Quieter. The kind that makes longtime viewers stop for a moment and remember an entire era rather than a single role. David Burke, the British actor remembered by many as Dr. John Watson in the early Sherlock Holmes television adaptations alongside Jeremy Brett, has died. His passing was confirmed, bringing sadness to generations who believed those Granada productions captured something rare, perhaps the closest television ever came to the spirit of Conan Doyle. If you watched British television in the 1980s, you know what I mean. Those series moved at a slower pace, careful dialogue, foggy London streets. Holmes, before modern reboots, turned everything louder. And Burke's Watson wasn't simply a side character. He gave warmth to the stories, intelligence, loyalty. He felt human beside genius. Born in Liverpool in 1934, Burke belonged to a generation of actors shaped before celebrity culture became relentless. Training mattered. Theater mattered. Craft came first. I've always thought audiences underestimate supporting performances. Yet remove someone like David Burke, and the whole memory changes. 91 years is a long life. Still, when an actor is tied to something people return to for comfort, age almost stops meaning anything. Fans continue seeing them as they were, younger, stepping through Baker Street with certainty. And now another face connected to classic television slips into memory. That happens more often lately. You revisit old episodes thinking you're returning to fiction, then realize you're also visiting pieces of your own life. The years when those programs aired, who sat beside you, what evenings felt like before everything sped up. Strange how actors leave twice. First from the screen, then from the world, yet somehow, never completely. The passing of Michael Pennington at 82 may not arrive with the noise reserved for Hollywood celebrities, but for people who spent years loving British theatre, Shakespeare, and serious acting, this loss carries weight. Michael Pennington has died at the age of 82. Actor, director, writer. A man who devoted decades to the stage and helped shape how Shakespeare reached modern audiences through the English Shakespeare Company, which he co-founded in the mid-1980s. That was a bold idea at the time, bringing classical works into a changing Britain. His death was confirmed, closing a career that stretched far beyond applause and curtain calls. Because actors like Pennington belong to a different tradition. Not fame first, work first. Born in Cambridge in 1943, during a world still marked by war, he came from a generation that viewed theater as discipline. Long rehearsals, language treated seriously, audiences willing to sit for hours and listen carefully. I sometimes think younger viewers underestimate what Shakespeare meant to earlier generations. School lessons, BBC productions, evenings at regional theaters. Entire lives surrounded by those words. Pennington stayed close to that world. And perhaps that is why his passing feels reflective rather than shocking. 82 years. A long journey? Yes. Still, people who dedicate themselves to art leave behind something difficult to measure. Not headlines. Influence. Former students. Actors inspired by them. Audiences who remember a performance decades later without remembering the exact year. That's strange, isn't it? You forget dates. You forget reviews. But a voice on stage, a line spoken with conviction. Those remain. Time keeps moving. The people who preserved older traditions slowly disappear. Then one day you realize they were also preserving part of your own memory. Long before the red carpets, before the fame, before millions of people would forever connect her face to adventure, time travel, and an entire generation of movies. There was simply a little girl born on May 31st, 1961, in Rochester, Minnesota. Leah Thompson grew up in a family where discipline wasn't optional. Her mother was a musician. Expectations were high, very high. And as a child, Leah didn't dream first about Hollywood. She dreamed about ballet, not acting. Ballet. That matters because ballet teaches something strange to children. You learn that pain arrives early. You learn perfection is impossible, but people expect it anyway. By her teens, Leah was already training seriously. Hours and hours. The kind of routine most children would hate. While others were living ordinary teenage years, she was shaping herself around sacrifice. At one point, she reportedly trained with enough dedication to become a professional ballerina. She even earned scholarships. Her future looked mapped out. Then something happened. Not tragedy exactly, but a door closed. She auditioned for the American Ballet Theater and was reportedly told her body type wasn't ideal for principal roles. Imagine hearing that when your entire identity has been built around one dream. You are good, but not enough. Those words linger. For some people, rejection becomes a permanent home. For Leah, it became a detour. She moved toward modeling first, then commercials. Slowly, acting entered her life almost sideways, as if it had been waiting quietly all along. The late 1970s and early 1980s in America felt different. Television had a softer glow. Families gathered together. Movie stars seemed untouchable. And there was Leah. Young, blonde, funny, slightly unconventional. Not polished in the intimidating way some actresses were. More approachable, like someone viewers could imagine knowing. Her early film appearances began building momentum. Small steps, nothing guaranteed. Hollywood often rewards beauty for a season and forgets the person underneath. Many women disappear before audiences even learn their names. Leah stayed. That says something, because survival in Hollywood may require more endurance than talent. Years later, audiences would know her for confidence and warmth on screen. But confidence often grows from old disappointments, from being told no, from reinventing yourself before anyone notices you're struggling. And maybe that little girl practicing ballet in Minnesota never disappeared completely. Maybe she still exists, inside every interview, every smile, every role, still proving something, still moving, still becoming. By the early 1980s, Leah Thompson was no longer the former ballet student trying to find another dream. She was working, building a career one role at a time. Then came 1983, a film called All the Right Moves, alongside a young Tom Cruise. The movie wasn't the biggest event of her life, but something else happened behind the scenes. The two dated briefly. Young Hollywood, ambition everywhere. Nothing unusual, except years later, those moments become strange pieces of history. Two future stars crossing paths before becoming who the world remembers. Then 1985 arrived, and everything changed. Back to the future. Leah became Lorraine Baines McFly, a mother, a teenager. Funny, awkward, emotional. Somehow, all at once. People still talk about that movie decades later, because some films stop being entertainment. They become memory. Families watched it together. Children became grandparents and still remember scenes by heart. Success sounds beautiful from far away, but fame can be unsettling. Your face stops belonging only to you. People preserve versions of you frozen in time while your real life keeps moving. Leah kept working, not chasing one role forever. That mattered. because many actresses from the 1980s disappeared after their biggest success. She adapted instead. And adaptation is its own kind of survival. Behind the smile, audiences knew. There was still someone who had already learned, years before Hollywood, that reinvention sometimes begins with disappointment. There's something unusual about Hollywood marriages. People stop believing in them. Too much pressure. Too much distance. Too many headlines built around endings. And yet, Lea Thompson's story took another direction. In 1987, while filming Some Kind of Wonderful, she met actor and director Howard Deutsch. Not during a glamorous award ceremony, not through scandal, just work. A film set. The ordinary place where extraordinary things sometimes begin. They married in 1989, and somehow, they remained together. Decades passed. That alone sounds almost unbelievable in Hollywood. Their daughters, including actress Zoe Deutsch, grew up around creativity, cameras, scripts, long hours, but also around parents who stayed. That matters more than people admit, especially for women who spent years watching celebrity families collapse in magazines. Lea became something unexpected over time. Not only an actress people remembered, but a woman who appeared to age without declaring war against aging itself. That may sound small. It isn't. Because American culture often treated women over 50 as if visibility had an expiration date. Actresses from the 70s and 80s knew this pressure intimately. The unspoken message, stay young, stay beautiful, stay relevant, or disappear. Lea never entirely disappeared. She worked in television, Hallmark films, directed projects, reinvented herself again. Different decades, different audiences, still present. And maybe reinvention was always her hidden talent. First ballet, then acting, then motherhood, then directing, then becoming one of those rare familiar faces viewers see years later and think, she feels like part of my life somehow. Not because they knew her personally, but because her movies sat in living rooms during ordinary American evenings, beside cups of coffee, family arguments, children on carpets, the soundtrack of real life. Yet aging publicly carries another kind of vulnerability. You become evidence of time itself. People compare, remember, measure. And somewhere beneath success, there may still be quiet fears. Have I done enough? Do people remember who I really was? What remains when the biggest roles are behind me? Questions many women ask themselves too. Not only celebrities, everyone. There comes a moment in nearly every long life when people stop asking what you will become and start asking who you used to be. That can be cruel, especially for women. Lea Thompson entered an industry that celebrated youth almost obsessively. The 1980s rewarded bright faces, energy, beauty that looked effortless. Then decades passed, quietly at first, until one day younger audiences discovered Back to the Future as an old movie. Imagine that. The film that once felt modern becoming history. And somehow, Lea witnessed all of it. Entire generations growing older beside her. What many people missed was this. She kept working. Not loudly, not desperately, just steadily. Television appearances, holiday films, directing episodes, independent projects, a different kind of success. The kind built on endurance instead of headlines. In 2014, she competed on Dancing with the Stars. More than entertainment, it felt symbolic. Because returning to dance decades after abandoning a professional ballet path must awaken old memories. Old disappointments, too. The body remembers things. Dreams unfinished. Versions of ourselves we left behind. Watching her dance, Some viewers probably saw confidence. Others may have seen courage. Those are not always the same thing. Courage sometimes looks like showing up while knowing people will compare you to your younger self. And comparison is exhausting, especially after 50, after 60. Women understand this in ways statistics never explain. The mirror changes. Friends disappear. Parents die. Health conversations become more common. The future starts feeling shorter than the past. Leah rarely built a public image around tragedy or scandal. That alone separates her from many celebrity stories. No endless reinventions through chaos. No identity built around collapse. But quiet lives contain struggles too. Long marriages require sacrifices people never witness. Motherhood changes ambition. Careers rise and cool down. There are years when the phone rings less. Years when the world moves faster than your generation. And still, you continue. That may be one of the most overlooked forms of strength. Not surviving catastrophe. Simply continuing. Today, Leah Thompson represents something unusual for many women who grew up watching her. Proof that aging does not erase a person. It adds layers. The hopeful young dancer. The actress finding her place. The mother. The wife. The director. The woman audiences remember from another era. All still existing together somehow. Not replaced. Accumulated. Because maybe becoming older was never about losing who you were. Maybe it means carrying every version of yourself at once. And if that's true, then somewhere inside Leah Thompson, that determined girl from Minnesota is probably still there. Still practicing. Still adapting. Still wondering what comes next. There was a time when people looked at Leah Thompson and saw possibility. Youth. The future. A girl stepping into movies that would become part of American memory. Now, decades later, many people look at her and see something else. Continuity. And continuity becomes precious as we age. Because eventually, familiar faces begin disappearing. Actors we assumed would always be here. Singers whose voices once filled kitchens and car radios. Friends, parents, sometimes spouses. Time changes the room without asking permission. Leah Thompson turned 65 in 2026. That number sounds larger written down than lived. Most people who reach that age understand something younger generations often miss. Life rarely unfolds in a straight line. Dreams change. Bodies change. What hurts changes. What matters changes too. And maybe that explains why her story still resonates. Not because it was perfect, because it wasn't. The ballet career that never fully happened. The constant need to reinvent in Hollywood. The pressure women carry while aging publicly. The effort required to remain visible without losing yourself. Those things feel human. More human than fame. Today, Leah still works, still appears, still creates. Not trapped inside the decade that made her famous. That deserves respect. Because many people spend their later years trying to return to who they were. She seems to have learned something different. Keep moving. Become someone new without betraying who you've already been. There's a softness in that lesson. And perhaps women who watched her in the 1980s understand it best. The teenagers who became mothers. The mothers who became grandmothers. The women who survived losses nobody fully saw. Maybe they recognize pieces of themselves. Not in celebrity, in endurance. Leah Thompson's legacy may never rest only in blockbuster films or famous scenes. It may live somewhere quieter, in familiarity, in memory, in the strange comfort of seeing someone age beside your own life. And her story doesn't feel finished. Not really. because some people stop becoming long before they stop living. Others remain curious, open, willing to evolve. Leah seems closer to the second kind, which means somewhere tonight, perhaps she is laughing with family, planning another project, remembering old versions of herself, or thinking about dreams still untouched. Not endings, just more pages, more ordinary mornings, more life. And for people who grew up watching her, maybe that is enough. Maybe that is beautiful in its own quieter way. The passing of George Wendt at 76 feels personal to many Americans, even those who never followed Hollywood closely. Because George Wendt wasn't just an actor. For millions, he was Norm from Cheers. And for a long stretch of the 1980s and early 1990s, Cheers wasn't simply a television show, it was part of the weekly routine. George Wendt has died at 76. The news was confirmed, leaving behind viewers who still remember hearing, "Norm," the moment his character walked into the bar. That reaction became one of television's most familiar rituals. Simple, funny, comforting. If you lived through those years, you understand. Cheers arrived before phones interrupted dinner, before streaming scattered audiences. People watched together. The bar on screen started feeling almost real. And Norm Peterson, he represented something recognizable. An ordinary man carrying everyday frustrations with humor. George Wendt played him with warmth instead of performance. That's harder than it looks. Born in Chicago in 1948, Wendt built a career many actors quietly envy. 6 consecutive Emmy nominations for Cheers. Yet fame never seemed to erase the impression that he remained approachable. I always thought characters like Norm survived because they reminded people of someone they knew. A friend, a co-worker, maybe even themselves. 76 doesn't sound young, but loss doesn't measure age that way. Especially when someone belongs to memories tied to your own life. Old living rooms, late-night reruns, laughter shared with people who may no longer be here either. That's the strange part of getting older. You begin mourning actors, and somewhere beneath that, you realize you're also mourning pieces of time. The years, the routines, the version of yourself who once sat down and believed those familiar television worlds would somehow last forever. The passing of Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa at 75 feels like the loss of one of those faces audiences never forgot, even if they didn't always know his full story. Because some actors become attached to an era, a sound, a character. For many, Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa will always be remembered as Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat. The villain whose voice carried menace before special effects took over everything. His death at 75 was confirmed, leaving fans from the arcade generation and 1990s action films confronting an unexpected sadness. If you were there in the early 90s, you probably remember. Video game cabinets glowing in shopping malls. Teenagers gathered around fighting games. Then came Mortal Kombat, controversial enough to spark debates in the United States, and even influence conversations about video game ratings. Different times. Tagawa stepped into that world and created a villain people still imitate decades later. Your soul is mine. Simple line, lasting impact. Born in Tokyo in 1950 and later building a career in America, he represented something not always common in Hollywood during those years, an Asian actor whose screen presence could dominate an entire scene. Quiet intensity. Discipline. I think audiences underestimate how difficult that is. And while villains receive applause differently from heroes, memorable villains often survive longer in memory. 75 years. A full life by many measures. Yet losses tied to childhood memories land differently. Because when someone connected to old movies or games disappears, a small part of the period surrounding them returns too. The room you played in, the friends beside you, the years before responsibilities multiplied. Time moves without asking. Then one day, the characters who seemed immortal begin leaving, and you realize memory may be the only place where they continue exactly as you first knew them.